The Battle of Drass, 1999, securing the strategic lifeline of Ladakh. Introduction: Drass as a strategic problem, not the battlefield. The Battle of Drass during the Kargil War was not an isolated clash of patrols, nor a symbolic fight for prestige. It was a systematic contest over logistics, altitude dominance, and national credibility, fought in one of the harshest environments in which modern armies have ever conducted sustained combat operations. Drass mattered because it sat astride the Srinagar-Leh Highway (NH-1A), the single arterial route sustaining Indian military and civilian life in Ladakh. Whoever controlled the heights overlooking this corridor controlled the fate of an entire region. Pakistan's intrusion into the Dras sector was predictable on calculated assumption that India would be slow, constrained, politically hesitant, and operationally conservative when faced with high-altitude occupation by enemy forces. That assumption proved catastrophically wrong. What unfolded in Dras was not merely a tactical counterattack but a comprehensive demonstration of how terrain, artillery, infantry endurance, and political restraint can be integrated into a coherent war-fighting doctrine under extreme pressure. This this article would examine exactly that in depth: its geography, strategic logic, operational phases, tactical engagements, logistical realities, command decisions, and long-term implications, placing it firmly within the broader context of the Kargil War and South Asian military history. Geography and terrain. Why Dras was the key. Dras lies in the western part of Ladakh, often described as second coldest inhabited place on Earth. But temperature alone doesn't explain its military significance. Dras is a valley corridor system flanked by towering ridges that rise abruptly to heights of 16 to 18,000 feet. These ridges dominate NH-1A, the road linking Srinagar to Leh. In mountain warfare, height equals comfort. Observation, fire, dominance, and psychological lever flow downhill. Any force occupying the ridge lines above Dras could observe Indian military convoy movements in real time, interdict traffic with machine guns, mortars, and artillery observations, disruption of logistics without needing large troop concentrations, impose continuous attrition at minimum cost. Pakistan planners understood this. Their strategy relied on occupying key tactical heights such as Tololing, Tiger Hill, point 4875, transforming geography into a force multiplier. These assumptions were that was once entrenched, these positions would be nearly impossible to dislodge without an unacceptable casualties, thereby forcing India into diplomatic compromise. Strategic context: Pakistan's calculated gamble. The intrusion into Dras was part of a broader operation establishment, conceived within Pakistani military establishment. The idea was not to fight a conventional war but to alter the strategic balance under the nuclear overhang. Assuming India would be deterred from escalation, the objectives were layered: cut to threaten NH-1A, thereby isolating Ladakh; politically internalize the Kashmir issue by provoking a crisis; psychologically demonstrate Indian vulnerability despite conventional superiority; operational: force India to divert resources from Siachen and other fronts. Crucially, Pakistan relied on troops of the Northern Light Infantry (NL-1), disguised initially as irregulars occupying winter-vacated Indian positions. This allowed plausible deniability in the early stages and delayed Indian clarity about the scale of intrusion. However, this strategy rested on one fatal miscalculation: it underestimated Indian tolerance for casualties when core territorial access was threatened. Discovery and shock: India realizes the scale of the intrusions. Indian patrols initially detected unusual activity in the Dras sector during late April and early May. What began as reports of local shepherds encountering armed men soon escalated into firefights that revealed something far more serious than militant infiltration. By May, by May, it became clear that entire ridge lines had been occupied completely with fortified sangars, supply caches, and observation posts. Indian convoys on NH-1A came under direct fire. This was not harassment; it was positional warfare. The shock was not merely tactical, it was institutional. The realization that Pakistani forces had crossed the LOC in strength and entrenched themselves posed immediate questions about intelligence gaps, winter surveillance practices, and assumptions about enemy intent. Yet, once the scale was understood, the Indian response hardened rapidly. India's strategic restraint, fighting hard without crossing the LOC. One of the defining features of the Battle of Drass was India's political decision to restrict operations strictly to the side of the LOC imposed. This imposed severe military constraints: no flanking maneuvers across the LOC, no direct attacks on Pakistani supply routes, no deep interaction on staging areas. From a purely military perspective, these were limitations that favored the defender. Yet India accepted them deliberately, understanding that strategic legitimacy and international support were as important as battlefield success. The restraint forced Indian commanders to solve the problem the hard way: frontal, uphill assaults against fortified positions, supported by artillery under conditions of extreme altitude and weather. Operational mobility: infantry, artillery, and logistics. The Indian Army mobilized rapidly. Units from multiple regiments were inducted into the Drass sector, including infantry battalions accustomed to high altitude operations. Artillery units, particularly those equipped with Bofors FH-77B guns, were repositioned to provide sustained fire support. Logistics proved a formidable challenge. Troops operated at altitudes where oxygen levels were nearly 50% of sea level. Every kilogram of ammunition, food, water had to be hauled up steep slopes. Casualties Casualty evacuation was slow, dangerous, and often conducted under fire. Weather shifted unpredictably. Ground helicopters freezing Ground helicopters and freezing equipment. Despite these constraints, India achieved logistical continuity, ensuring that attacking troops were never completely starved of support. Tololing, the psychological and tactical turning point. The Battle of Tololing was one of the earliest and most significant engagement in the Drass sector. Overlooking NH-1A, Tololing allowed Pakistani forces to observe target Indian movement with deadly precision. Initial Indian assaults failed. Steep gradients, well-entrenched defenders, and accurate fire exacted heavy casualties. Yet, withdrawal was not an option. The very visibility of Tololing made it a symbol and operational necessity. Repeated assaults combined with precise artillery fire eventually wore down the defenders. The capture of Tololing marked the first major breach in the Pakistani defensive ring around Dras. More importantly, it shattered the myth of invincibility of the heights. From this point onward, the momentum and psychological the momentum, psychological as much as tactical, began to shift. Tiger Hill, the apex of the Dras campaign. If Tololing was the key, Tiger Hill was the crown. Rising to over 16,700 feet, Tiger Hill dominated vast stretches of NH-1A and surrounding valleys. Pakistani forces believed it to be impregnable, especially from the western face, which was nearly vertical. Indian planners devised a complete assault: multi-directional infantry attacks, night climbs using ropes, mountaineering equipment, continuous artillery bombardment to suppress defenders. The assault on Tiger Hill was not swift, it was methodical, exhausting, and lethal. Soldiers climbed icy cliffs under fire, often in silence, relying on discipline rather than speed. The eventual capture of Tiger Hill was decisive. It denied Pakistan its most valuable observation post and sent a clear signal: no height, however steep, would be conceded. Point 4875 Batra Top. Close combat at extreme altitude. The battle for Point 4875, later known as the Batra Top, exemplified the brutal intimacy of high altitude warfare. Unlike artillery-dominated engagements, this fight devolved into close quarter combat, grenades, rifles, and bayonets. Fought in thin air where exhaustion was as deadly as enemy fire. At such altitudes, reaction time slows, wounds heal poorly, simple tasks become ordeal, yet Indian troops press forward, driven by mission clarity and unit cohesion. The capture of Point 4875 eliminated other Pakistani strongholds threatening Das and further collapsed the defensive network built around the highway. Artillery, the silent decider. When infantry assaults captured headlines, artillery was the decisive instrument in the Battle of Dras. Indian gunners adapted quickly to mountain warfare. High angle fire to target river slopes, sustained barrages to deny enemy rest and resupply, precision strikes guided by forward observers. The Bofors guns in particular proved invaluable. Their range, accuracy, and reliability, often under hard conditions, allowed India to neutralize bunkers that infantry alone couldn't approach. Artillery turned altitude from an advantage into a liability for the defenders, collapsing sangars and eroding morale. Collapse of Pakistani positions and securing NH-1A. By the early July 1999, Pakistani positions in the Dras sector began to unravel. Cut off from effective resupply, subjected to relentless fire and facing determined infantry assaults, the defenders withdrew, were eliminated. With the heights secured, Indian engineers moved swiftly to clear debris from NH-1A, repaired damaged road section, restored uninterrupted logistical flow to Ladakh. The highway, once under constant threat, returned to Indian control strategically, and the battle was won. Casualties and cost. The price of uphill warfare. The Battle of Drass was costly. Indian forces suffered significant casualties, a direct consequence of attacking fortified positions under severe constraint. Every meter gained came at a price. Yet the strategic perspective, these losses were absorbed rather than wasted. Each captured height reduced long-term vulnerability and denied the enemy any leverage. Pakistan, for its part, suffered heavy losses, many unacknowledged for years, particularly among NLI units, Northern Light Infantry units. Strategic consequences why Dras decided the war. The recapture of Dras had effects far beyond the battlefield. It ensured the security of Ladakh. It demonstrated India's capacity for restrained yet decisive military action. It undercut Pakistan's diplomatic narrative. It restored deterrence credibility without escalation. Once Dras fell, the logic of Pakistani intrusion collapsed. The remainder of Kargil war became a matter of damage limitations, not strategic ambition. Lessons of Dras: endurance, integration, and political control. The Battle of Dras offers enduring lessons. Terrain dominance strategy in mountain warfare. Logistics win wars, even in the most inhospitable environments. Political restraint doesn't imply military weakness. Artillery infantry integration is decisive against fortified defenders. Moral and discipline can overcome altitude, weather, and fear. Conclusion: Dras as a correction, not a triumph. Dras was not a romantic victory. It was the correction of a strategic miscalculation by Pakistan and a reaffirmation of India's ability to defend vital interests under extreme pressure. The soldiers who fought there didn't fight for symbolism. They fought because roads, ridges, and logistics mattered. Because surrendering height meant surrendering control, and because in war, restraint is meaningful only when backed by the will to endure costs. The Battle of Dras stands as one of the clearest examples in modern military history of how discipline, patience, and relentless execution can defeat even the most difficult terrain based challenge.